Russian leader Vladimir Putin has become unable to trust even his own generals. Vladimir Putin, who even suspected his own generals after the claims that there would be an airstrike on Moscow, decided to increase security measures in Moscow. Vladimir Putin has recalled the S-400 air defense systems that he sent to Ukrainian territory to be placed in Moscow. The S-400 air defense systems planned to be deployed to the capital Moscow have been destroyed by the Ukrainian army after the Ukrainian intelligence service detected the shipment train, taking the air defense systems back to the Russian borders. The Ukrainian army took action and prevented the Russian shipment train from reaching Russia. This imprudence of Vladimir Putin has caused Russia to suffer millions of dollars in losses. The shock of the recent coup attempt by Wagner mercenary company owner Yevgeny Prigozhin, known as a close friend of Vladimir Putin, is still felt in the Kremlin palace, having been betrayed by a name so close to him. Putin is now at a loss. Who to trust? Prigozhin, thanks to Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, stopped the coup in progress and withdrew Wagner troops from Russia's borders. Thus, the Putin regime continued to live in Russia. However, this incident has taught Putin that he should not trust even his own relatives. Now Putin has become unable to trust even the Russian generals he put in office, knowing that many Russian generals serving in the Russian armed forces are in close relations with Yevgeny Prigozhin. Putin is investigating which generals Prigozhin supported this coup attempt, as it is known after the Wagner soldiers secured control of the Russian cities of Rostov and Voronezh. Some of the Russian soldiers serving here joined the Wagner soldiers. At the same time, even Russian soldiers sent by Putin to the territory of Ukraine made statements that they supported the coup that Wagner soldiers were trying to carry out. This has led Vladimir Putin to become even more paranoid. Putin, who began to find out which generals controlled the Russian soldiers who supported Wagner, became unable to trust even the closest one. We understood that the situation was so serious when Putin even restricted the powers of his own generals after the allegations that an airstrike would be carried out on Moscow. Sergei Naryshkin, the head of the Russian intelligence service, informed Vladimir Putin that they had received information that the Ukrainian army would soon launch an airstrike against Moscow. The Ukrainian army has captured some border towns in the Kharkiv region located on the Ukrainian border with Russia, and they have found that long-range missiles have begun to be shipped to these captured areas by Ukrainian soldiers, Naryshkin said, suspecting an airstrike on Moscow. With these long-range missiles, according to information obtained from sources close to the Kremlin after Sergei Naryshkin's warnings, the generals serving in the Russian Air Force Command activated 3 Su-27 fighter jets and asked for a reconnaissance flight. It is said that Putin opposed the generals who wanted the planes to take off. During the meeting, Russian leader Vladimir Putin did not allow his own generals to remove these planes and asked them to wait for news from him. The main reason for this is that Wagner soldiers took control of the military airport here when they captured the city of Rostov, and Wagner Commander Yevgeny Prigozhin sat down and chatted with generals serving in the Russian Air Force at this airbase. Putin is acting quite paranoid at the moment because he is very suspicious that the commanders he has appointed have such close relations with Prigozhin. Thus, Putin did not allow the Su-25 fighter jets to take off, instead doing what he knows. Putin decided to deploy new air defense systems to Moscow in order to block the airstrikes of the Ukrainian army. Already, many of the roofs of tall buildings in Moscow have Pantsir and S-300 model air defense systems. Now, Putin has asked for the deployment of these S-400 air defense systems. However, there was one thing he forgot. All of the S-400 air defense systems have been deployed to various cities of Russia and border regions in order to protect border security. On top of this, Putin decided to bring S-400 air defense systems to Moscow, which have been shipped to the Luhansk region, where the violence of the war has been less in recent weeks. Thus, action was taken to bring the S-400 air defense systems back to Moscow before they were even deployed to the Luhansk region. The air defense systems, which were previously taken to the Luhansk region by train, were to be taken back to the Russian border gates by train. From here it was to be shipped to Moscow via military trucks. However, things did not go as Putin planned, and the Ukrainian military blew up a shipment train with S-400 air defense systems departing from Luhansk. Thanks to this information, which the rebel Russian soldiers and the Russian army passed to the Ukrainian intelligence service, the Ukrainian army was informed that Russia would make a shipment of S-400s. It is thought that those who passed this information to Ukraine were a minority of soldiers who served in the Russian army and were quite angry with Putin because for the realization of this shipment, the 21st in the Luhansk region, the soldiers of the Tanker Brigade had been notified. The soldiers of this brigade unit consist of minority soldiers living in autonomous regions such as Crimea and Dagestan. The Ukrainian intelligence service knew the railway route to be followed by the shipment train that was going to depart from Luhansk. The S-400 air defense systems were to depart from Luhansk and be taken to Mitinskaya district in Rostov Oblast, Russia. Ukrainian intelligence officials identified the railway route and forwarded these routes to Ukrainian troop commanders. Ukrainian soldiers who took action together with the detection of the railway route planned to place explosives on the railway that the shipment train would use. Ukrainian soldiers who went to the town of Sukhadol, which is on the route where the train will pass, placed plastic explosives on the railways here with the placement of explosives. All the Ukrainian soldiers hiding in the forest area now had to do was wait. After hours of waiting, the shipment train approached the area where the Ukrainian soldiers were hiding. Ukrainian soldiers activated the explosives by remote control, while the S-400 shipment train passed over the plastic explosives, allowing the train to go off the tracks and overturn. With the separation of the wagons from each other, a large fire broke out in the mechanics section of the raking train. The Russian soldiers who were escorting the train were surprised by what they suffered. Russian soldiers trying to get out of the overturned wagons had to be decked out when they saw Ukrainian soldiers in front of them. The Ukrainian army captured 28 Russian soldiers with this operation it organized, while it also captured 2 S-400 air defense systems. However, the main interesting incident began with the burning of the seized S-400 air defense systems by Ukrainian soldiers. The Ukrainian army, which took the S-400 Siemens to their headquarters along with the captured Russian soldiers, was aware that they could activate and use these defense systems. For this reason, Ukrainian soldiers who started burning S-400s in front of the Ukrainian army headquarters set fire to Vladimir Putin's favorite weapon. The incident grew even more when the operation organized by the Ukrainian army and the burning of S-400s were heard within the borders of Russia. When Putin's plan to deploy S-400 air defense systems to the capital, Moscow did not hold up, Russian citizens began to think that Moscow was not safe. Thousands of Russian citizens have taken to the streets to organize anti-Putin and anti-war protests. Due to the fact that the Ukrainian army has been conducting too many operations inside Russia's borders over the past few months, Russian citizens no longer consider Putin unable to ensure Russia's security. The Ukrainian army's capture of the border towns of Belgorod, Russia, and the fact that Wagner soldiers took control of 2 of Russia's largest cities immediately after this incident made the Russian people very nervous. Russian citizens began to think that Vladimir Putin and the Russian army no longer have their former power. This opinion of the Russian people has been one of the events that has shaken Putin's authority the most. The Ukrainian army, which wants to take advantage of this big mistake made by Putin, turned this situation into an opportunity without wasting any time. Putin, who wants to send the air defense systems here to Moscow because he thinks the Luhansk region is a safe zone, has given a great opportunity to the Ukrainian army. The Ukrainian army, which destroyed the S-400s shipped from the Luhansk region to Moscow, was now aware that Luhansk had become an open target. The Ukrainian army wanted to conduct an air operation against Russian headquarters in the Luhansk region with the long-range HIMARS missiles it has placed in the city of Kramatorsk, Ukraine, which organized a reconnaissance flight with 2 unmanned combat aircraft, identified the location of one of the Russian headquarters established in the Luhansk region. Having obtained the coordinates of the headquarters thanks to unmanned combat aircraft, Ukraine entered these coordinates into the missile systems and the operation was launched. 3 missiles were fired at the Russian headquarters in Luhansk, and 2 of these missiles successfully reached their target. 2 missiles also hit the headquarters building located at the headquarters. The building located at the headquarters was razed to the ground when the missiles hit. It is known that there are Russian officers and soldiers in the building, but there is no clear information about their number. According to the statements of the Ukrainian government, more than 70 Russian soldiers are reported to have lost their lives. The fact that the Ukrainian army was able to carry out airstrikes on the Luhansk region so easily infuriated Vladimir Putin. We are not mistaken if we say that Vladimir Putin also benefited a lot from the successful implementation of this operation by the Ukrainian army. As the Russian air defense systems within the borders of Ukraine began to decrease, support from the Ukrainian allied countries also began to arrive. Poland, which has provided both military and material support to the Ukrainian army since the beginning of the war, has agreed to provide fighter jets to the Ukrainian army. Interestingly, after Poland agreed to send fighter jets, Slovakia expressed that it would send fighter jets to Ukraine. The Slovak authorities have shown a neutral policy for a long time, but now they should break this neutrality, expressing that they have provided the greatest assistance to Ukraine so far. Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky had been saying that Ukraine needed fighter jets since the beginning of the war. Earlier, when America agreed to send tanks to Ukraine, many countries decided to send tanks to Ukraine. Poland, Finland, Lithuania, and Denmark were also among the countries that sent tanks to Ukraine. Now it seems that a new support coalition may be formed, with Poland and Slovakia sending fighter jets to Ukraine. It is quite ironic that Poland and Slovakia sending fighter jets to Ukraine are Soviet-made. Russia will be shot down by the Ukrainian army with its own manufactured warplanes. Russian government officials, annoyed by the fact that Poland and Slovakia sent fighter jets to Ukraine, warned the Polish authorities in very harsh language. Poland, which was the first country to agree to send aircraft to Ukraine, has always been on Ukraine's side. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, on the other hand, made it clear that all warplanes sent to Ukraine will be destroyed and sanctions will be imposed on countries that agree to send aircraft. It is estimated that these sanctions will be applied over natural gas and oil, as it is known. Germany had previously agreed that it would ship tanks for the Ukrainian army. Immediately after Germany's decision, Russian leader Vladimir Putin stopped the operation of gas pipelines to Germany. Putin stated that they stopped these natural gas pipes under the name of maintenance work because he could not officially say that he had stopped the gas pipeline to Germany. Now, Putin is expected to make the same intervention in Poland and Slovakia as it is known in the first months of the war. The Ukrainian army inventory was quite weak compared to the Russian army inventory, while Russia had long-range missiles, air defense systems, and modern weapons and equipment. The Ukrainian army was resisting the Russian forces with simpler weapons. However, as the number of Ukrainian allied countries increased, the Ukrainian army inventory also became stronger. Thus, Russia, which is larger than Ukraine in both military and economic terms, has become equal to Ukraine thanks to the military equipment support provided by the United States and Western countries. To the Ukrainian army inventory has been created almost from the beginning. Putin has constantly threatened Western countries in an attempt to block these supports to the Ukrainian military. No European country heeded this threat of Putin, who first threatened to impose an energy embargo. But after a while, Putin threatened the whole of Europe with nuclear weapons. However, the US government has guaranteed that Russia will never use nuclear weapons on the territory of Ukraine if Russia makes such a move. US officials have stated that they will take action against Russia. On the other hand, Britain, which was one of the countries that provided only military equipment and material assistance to Ukraine in the first months of the war, now seems to have completely broken its silence. Britain, which does not hesitate to support Ukraine by completely opposing Russia, continues to make major moves that will change the course of the war in favor of Ukraine. England has made the most vital move. These embargoes, which are regarded as Russia's worst action, have entirely shifted the balance of power in favor of Ukraine. The Russian people have now begun to stand up in opposition to these embargoes, and this time particularly strong anti-Putin protests have begun to express themselves in a row for a long time. The most significant concern of many countries has been the preservation of international peace. Although Putin's statements against international peace first drew attention, it was thoroughly exposed when he entered Ukraine. Putin began to take different moves in many sectors after initiating the war with Ukraine. Many nations' support for Ukraine during this unjust invasion experiment has far-reaching consequences across the world because of the precise position of these supplies. Putin erupted in rage as the Ukrainian army gained the lead in the fight, and he proceeded to attack and threaten all of the nations who backed Ukraine one after the other. Many nations, however, have opted to implement sanctions against Russia. Understanding that Russia now seeks to destabilize global peace and everything changed in an instant in favor of Ukraine. The United Kingdom and the United States are the nations that have done the most business in the sector of embargoes against Russia. It was logical that the United States would make such a large step because of its desire for domination. However, England's ambition in this area is one that will astound the entire globe. Russia's contempt for the UK, particularly on some subjects, and purportedly warning Boris Johnson that Putin will blow up this place with a single bomb has complicated matters. Along with them, the United Kingdom has made steps to mobilize on all subjects, and he thoroughly exposed the Russian army's breakthroughs in every department. But first and foremost, the United Kingdom began to give assistance to Ukraine. Money assistance was provided at the start of these programs. However, tanks and missiles were what Ukraine required the most at this era. While the UK does not want to take action on these concerns, Russia's escalating threats have compelled the administration to act, and the United Kingdom has begun shipping Challengers and Storm Shadows to Ukraine. After that, while Russia's threats varied, England took a bolder move this time, and Russia's business efforts in this region have ceased entirely. The Baltic Sea became one of Russia's most significant commercial routes. Russia has only one economic channel remaining after the Russian army implemented embargoes in recent days. It was anticipated that if this was likewise closed, Russia would continue to deteriorate. However, Putin has been unable to discern who the main force in this region is. He also made the error of threatening England. Following that, Britain made the move that will give the entire world the impression that it has one of the world's biggest naval fleets. And he achieved the most significant breakthrough against the Russians who were attacking the Ukrainian army. Britain had its fleets ready to close the gap between the Baltic Sea and other trade routes. One of Russia's most pressing issues has been reintroduced as a result of this decision. Despite the fact that it has a large stock of products, the economic crisis has begun to have a significant impact on Russia, which does not have a Sunday to sell them on. Putin then took a significant move. He also asked that Britain withdraw its fleets from the area. In reaction to his originally menacing demeanor, he decided to send significant envoys this time to prevent the economy from collapsing. Each of these demands has been rejected by the United Kingdom. If Russia continues in this manner, it has warned that it may be forced to enter the conflict in the near future. Despite the warnings, he took the most critical step in terms of fighter airplanes. The United Kingdom, which trains the Ukrainian army's most significant pilots, laid the groundwork for Ukraine's progress under Rishi Sunak's leadership. Following that, the issue of sending fighter planes to the Ukrainian army was brought up. If things continue in this manner, it is expected that the Ukrainian army will take a fresh step toward achieving a relatively large victory against Russia as soon as possible. Putin was at a loss on what to do with this. It was unclear how he would proceed due to the challenges he also encountered in the commercial field. But Putin, understanding that Ukraine has grown so much as a result of the assistance, decided to approach other nations after that, and things have begun to swing totally in Ukraine's favor. Putin has begun calling all potential allies. However, it has been proven how impotent Russia is currently versus Ukraine. As a consequence of Russian organizations fighting against the Ukrainian army simultaneously attempting to revolt in specific regions, Putin decided to have frantic discussions with China and North Korea. Following that, the responses he received from the countries he wished to help against Ukraine astounded the entire globe. Russia intended to take efforts to exit the tumultuous situation it is in with Ukraine. He would have achieved a significant breakthrough against China at the start of these measures. Putin has agreed to meet with China. Although China has recently showed significant economic improvement, it is still not powerful enough to compete with the West because the economy was in serious trouble. The fact that China is becoming increasingly competent to attract trust seemed to tip the scales in Russia's favor. However, When the Ukrainian army's recent advances made it tough for the Russian army, China was anticipated to give aid. But Putin was in for a huge surprise. The Russian army's dissatisfaction has reached new heights day by day. The Ukrainian army is gaining ground against the Russians. China, on the other hand, was expected to take specific measures to avoid them. However, China was unable to back Russia. The main reason for this was that practically all of America's businesses were located in China. In the case of an emergency, i.e., the removal of all U.S. manufacturing and firms from this region would result in China's economy collapsing. That is why Putin's visit to China did not get the backing he desired. He even avoided mentioning the possibility of a U.S.-China partnership. The opinions made by war analysts on this problem have attained a quality that will resound all around the world. According to battlefield experts, the Ukrainian army enjoyed an edge in numerous places. If he is successful in these places, the odds of the Ukrainian army defeating the Russians in a short period of time grow. As a result of numerous nations who had previously had no success against Russia progressively making advances, the Russian army was left alone with increasing perplexity. However, because Russia is currently suffering many of the world's most serious problems, the uprising began to take shape in Russia, and as the insurrection progressed, it became clear that it would lead to far larger issues. In recent days, the Ukrainian army has made many breakthroughs against the Russians. However, it became clear that the Russian force, which is now entirely surrounded, would eventually retreat. As a result of the Ukrainian army's full-scale onslaught, it has become necessary to take considerably more drastic measures against the Russians, and the Russian military is now being compelled to return to its pretty ineffective anti-Ukraine campaign. Following that, Putin's problems are likely to gradually affect his political career, which is projected to deteriorate on a daily basis. The tanks that the UK has delivered to Ukraine have also recently been on the table. The Russian army suffered its biggest setback in the fight of the square, with the last operation coordinated by the Ukrainian army. The T-90s, extolled by Putin's propaganda tools, were given such a heavy blow that the Russian army was caught off guard as to what to do. And now, with this latest development, Putin has suffered his most humiliating loss. The Ukrainian army began to adopt a number of quite varied actions in the last days of the Russian-Ukrainian war. His rising domination and supremacy in numerous locations due to his exceptional successes in square fights helped things to swing in his favor at the start of these. But as a result of this current operation in Solidar, the Russian tanks suffered such a crushing defeat that the Russian media outlets were taken aback. Putin has been irritated by the recent outpouring of sympathy for Ukraine. The Russian people began to respond against Putin as a result of a huge number of nations' successive backing for Ukraine, particularly when the Russians, who believed that a large number of high-tech tanks would change the direction of the conflict, staged successive protests in specific locations. Putin began to manufacture propaganda, implying his own tanks. At first, there was propaganda claiming Russian T-90s were superior to Abrams and Challengers, which were sent as backup to Ukraine. However, recent discoveries have begun to show that this is not the case. The Abrams and Challengers, which are more powerful in terms of striking force and armor thickness, inflicted such a crushing blow to the Russian tanks that even Putin was unable to conceal the massive operation. Following the apparent failure of Russia's actions in recent days, Ukrainian intelligence has taken on new tasks. The Ukrainian army promptly organized an operation in this region after learning the location of the warehouse where a big number of tanks sent to the Ukrainian territory were held. The Ukrainian army opted to utilize Abrams and Challengers in the operation to demonstrate their supremacy over Russian tanks. The Ukrainian army has begun preparations to advance towards the area where the warehouse is located, knowing that these tanks would seize control of the territory from every angle. But at this very moment, the Ukrainian army was taken by surprise, and the mission was nearly derailed. At this time, the Ukrainian army has taken a significant stride as a consequence of the Ukrainian special forces being mobilized. At the same time for this operation, the Ukrainian army began to move towards the tank depot in the Solidar area. At this moment, the Ukrainian army had acquired intelligence that the tanks were being stored. At the same time, it was discovered that Russian tanks were on their way to Ukraine to plan an operation. This is precisely the condition that has resulted in many recent events, and the two factions clashed on the major road to Solidar. Under the influence of propaganda, the Russian army began to conduct condescending strikes after seeing Ukraine's tanks. There were nearly twice as many Russian tanks as Ukrainian tanks. The Russian army, which had expected an easy triumph, was in for the biggest surprise of its life. The Russian army discovered as it continued its strikes that the Ukrainian tanks could not pierce their armor. When the Abrams began firing artillery in succession, the Russian tanks began to be blown apart. One by one, the Russian army was in a state of fear. As a result of this predicament, the Ukrainian army's uranium-reinforced Abrams barrels were delivering such back-to-back hits to the Russians that the Russian soldiers behind the front began to feel hell. The Russian force, on the other hand, began to retire steadily. However, the tanks in Luhansk that Ukraine controls are not prepared to do so. The challengers continued to attack the Russians. The fact that they went on the offensive and that despite its 64-ton weight, it could travel at a pace of 50 kilometers, elevated this attack to a new level, and he laid the groundwork for Ukraine to fully exploit its advantageous position. The Ukrainian army was well equipped to strike the Russians the most severe blow, and he made good use of this equipment. During the procedure, the Russian forces began to escape rather than withdraw because of the intense assaults. Several of them even abandoned their tanks. The Ukrainian army seized a substantial portion of the enemy force while allowing the remainder to flee, regaining Ukrainian authority in this region. This attitude, which foreshadows the Ukrainian armies taking the lead in many regions, has given Russian soldiers a headache. When the United Kingdom's actions in this area began to alter, the Ukrainian army gained an advantage in numerous locations, and he began making plans to take the most drastic measures against the Russian troops. Putin erupted in rage when he learned of the operation. Putin has recently realized that he had retreated from the conflict. He began to blame the backward decline on the assistance offered to Ukraine, using these Russian people's support as a goal. He began to emphasize that the whole globe was mobilizing for Ukraine's victory. This crisis has begun to demonstrate to the rest of the world just how awful Russia is on the battlefield. Even Putin, who is seen as a strong leader, began to conceal his failure behind certain views, and the Russian people are becoming dissatisfied with the situation. And according to the most recent events, England took moves that would change everything. The Ukrainian army became increasingly powerful as a result of the UK's assistance. The initial challenger support came from England to Ukraine. Following that, England began to take considerably larger moves. Storm Shadows, which have a range of around 250 kilometers, provided the most important support to the Ukrainian army. These missile systems have given Ukraine the ability to attack even Moscow in a short period of time. Putin grew concerned when it was revealed that the UK was also training Ukrainian fighter pilots, and he began to take key measures by altering his anti-Ukraine policy. With these fresh developments, Putin has issued a critical command to his soldiers attacking Ukraine. Following this occurrence, Putin, who had ordered his whole army to adopt a defensive stance against the Ukrainian army, decided to deploy air defense systems to the Russian capital of Moscow. And it laid the stage for the Russian army's most cowardly time to date. The main reason for this is because Putin was documented as knowing something. If Putin loses this conflict, he will be unable to continue his mission in Russia, and this situation has the potential to have far-reaching consequences throughout the world. The turmoil that will follow his resignation will pave the way for things to become much more difficult. War analysts' remarks on this problem have reverberated throughout the world, and he proceeded to underline the importance of the battle once more. According to military specialists, the Ukrainian army may accomplish a massive victory in a short period of time. With this triumph, the Russian army's disintegration-prone structure, which is already crumbling like a domino stone, might suffer severe harm. And with the Russian army's most fundamental difficulties being addressed, the Ukrainian army's positional forward shift may now become permanent. In many ways, this episode may cause several nations in that region to no longer recognize Putin's Russia, and things are becoming more convoluted by the day, which might pose severe issues for any actions taken against Putin. While the Ukrainian army is now anticipate To achieve even larger triumphs over the Russians, Zelensky's harsh position at this stage has an impact on everyone. According to Zelensky, Ukraine should teach Russia a major lesson right now, and it demonstrates just how vital this is. If the Ukrainian army continues to take moves against the Russians in a variety of regions, things may shift in its favor. And this can now serve as the foundation for Ukraine's biggest triumph over Russia. If current trends continue, the Ukrainian army may inflict a devastating blow to the Russians.